How's it going? Andrew here, and welcome to episode 5 of Sketch Endeavor. Now, after episode 4, I got a heck of a lot of requests through for digital drawing. So that's exactly what we're going to talk about here. I'm going to show you my digital drawing process from start to finish. Let's go. Now this is only going to be a short video, and I'm going to give you an overview of the digital drawing process. Again, because we got so many requests for how I draw digitally, I thought this would be a really good time to talk about that and make the case for digital drawing, especially when it comes to traditional media. I believe the digital medium can offer an oil painter like me so much, and I would just hope that this video encourages you to give digital drawing a try, because not only is it really helpful, but it's loads of fun as well. So right off the bat, what are some of the things that we're going to need? Well, of course, it's going to help to have a computer. You can either use a Windows or a Mac. Here in the background, I'm drawing using a PC, and I'm using a Wacom tablet with a stylus. Now, in the beginning, there was a little bit of a shift. You see, when I'm drawing in the sketchbook or even I'm painting on canvas, I can actually see what my hand is doing, and I can see directly the mark that I'm making on the surface. But here with drawing digitally, I'm actually looking at a screen and looking at the results of what my hand is doing down here. I can't actually see directly what I'm doing, so that took a little bit of a mental shift and took a little getting used to. But once I did, and once my brain locked into that new pattern, I was really fascinated and really intrigued by these exciting new results that I was getting. Now again, I use digital drawing to help me with my compositions. And in this video, we're going to be drawing this mountain icy river scene. And as you can see, it's quite a complicated scene, so the digital medium was really helping me in shifting and moving some things, but also in conveying all sorts of different colors and textures. One of the things that I love about digital drawing is the tablet itself. This is something that is hypersensitive to the stylus point. And as I'm drawing across that surface, I'm able to make any kind of mark that I want, so long as I've selected the right brush tool in the program. Also, I really enjoy the use of shortcut keys down the side of the tablet, because this allows me to quickly change between different types of brush tools. Now, using Photoshop itself is really super organized in terms of the layout. Now, of course, you can customize this layout to suit your own needs, but what I really love is having all those brushes down the side, a color picker, my history panel, which allows me to go back and repeat anything where I feel like I've made a mistake, and also those layers so that I can add one thing on top of another. Now, the layers is a super important function for me when it comes to painting digitally, because this mimics the traditional oil painting process of my blocking in, my modeling, and my detail as if I was painting with oils. So I really love how transferable it is from the digital medium over into oil painting. Again, because of the immediacy of the digital medium, I'm able to move, shift, and manipulate all kinds of things. So as I'm drawing this picture, I'm going to be narrating over the top of the video and share with you a little bit of my thought process as we put together this scene. Now, the first thing is the size of the canvas that I'm working on. So here I've selected about 2000 by 3000 pixels, and that'll give me enough detail so I can zoom right in. Now, I'm really inspired by the landscape around me, so I want to use plenty of that South Island imagery, and a lot of this stuff is just down the road from me, so I'm super lucky to have such awesome images to work from. And all of my source material I'm using as inspiration. I'm not importing this into Photoshop and manipulating the photo, but rather I'm going to draw this from scratch, using pieces that I see in my photographs to guide me through the process. So I like bits of rock here and there, bits of snow, what the light and the sky is doing, as well as some individual textures. So all of that is going to inspire what you're going to see unfold in front of you now. I love how similar the digital medium is to traditional painting and drawing techniques. I start off nice and loose with just an outline of what I think I'd like to see. And then from here, I can begin to add embellishments. So I'm sketching out with just a simple brush tool or a pencil tool here. And as I continue to go over, I firm up some of these lines. Once I'm happy with my lines and the placement, I can then go about adding some color. And just like when I'm painting, I'm starting with whatever is furthest away first and working my way forward towards the viewer. I still have exactly the same considerations as if I was standing at the easel. I'm thinking about atmospheric perspective when I'm working in these distant areas. I'm avoiding strong contrast and saturated colors. That's going to be reserved for the immediate foreground. I'm also using a really broad tool here to sketch in some of these areas and trying to get a bit of an indication of light and form and shadow, but not go overboard. Again, I'm trying to allow some of these digital marks to inspire some of the details because I want this to be a made-up scene, not a picture of anything in particular, but just be faithful to the type of scene, but not an exact depiction, if you know what I mean. Totally makes sense to me. Hopefully that makes sense to you as well. In my mind, I hope the viewer of this picture that's familiar with the New Zealand landscape would be able to look at this and go, oh yeah, that's the South Island, totally, even though I've just completely made this up. So we're still being faithful to types of trees and geology and the light and all that sort of stuff. So this is kind of going for that typical South Island look without being anywhere in particular. Anyway, you get the point. Okay, so here, what I really love about some 19th century master landscape paintings is how they have these raging torrents and rivers that go right out the bottom corner of the composition. So I'm trying to evoke a bit of this feeling here. Again, what I like about this scene is that we got that snowy slope and that glacier hanging on the mountain just above, and that is kind of melting and it's leading into these beautiful waterfalls, and then that's how we get the source of this massive torrent of water that's in the foreground. I like that aspect of the cycle of water coming through in this composition. I'm carrying on with the same technique right the way through. So you see these broad marks fleshing out those trees and then the rocks. And then once I'm happy with this, I begin to firm up those lines again, but then I start getting a little bit thinner and I get a little bit more detailed with the types of marks that I'm making. Now here, because this is designed for an actual painting, I want to make sure I follow the golden ratio. So I hold this template that I made over the composition to make sure that some key areas in the composition actually line up to the 1:1.618 mark. Now, if you haven't already, check out my video on the golden ratio and using that mathematical ratio for your compositions. It is a dynamite technique that's been used by artists for centuries. Now, one of the things I love about the digital medium is being able to select and copy certain areas of the picture and then paste this back in and then play with the gradient and the actual tapering of one thing as it melts into another. So here I just wanted to completely change the shape of that mountain. No problem. If it was paint or pencil, that's a lot harder to do. And so this is one of the things I just love about digital is that we just get to do that immediately. And the consequences aren't that great because we don't have a lot of time invested in the process. And I found that going digital with some of my painting composition designs, that's allowed me to free up quite a lot. Now let me just draw your attention to the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. You see that little panel there that says layers? This is where the digital drawing actually has so many benefits over traditional media when it comes to design. I'm able to work one layer on top of another. So I started off with that background layer, which was my initial drawing that was very loose, and then worked over the top of this with a very blocky layer of color. And that would be mimicking my block in when I go to paint something like this at the easel. It's very simple and it's very crude in terms of its big blocky shapes and just very simple colors. Then from there, over the top of this, I start to work in details. But I'm trying to keep to as few layers as possible. But with a drawing like this, I'll probably typically get out to about 7 to 8 layers. If it gets too complicated, I'll start merging those layers down on top of one another just to avoid confusing myself. So now it's time to add to the degree of the complexity of this image, and I'm going to start to work a little bit more here with the water and try and work out exactly what's happening here in terms of the lighting dynamic and also the energy and the flow as this water bends around these rocks. Now, even though I'm making this scene up, I still want it to make sense. But here's the danger. When we go off script like this, we can create things that can be distracting. And one of the things that I've noticed about this river is that I don't like the way it's kind of stepping down in an even way and going right out the bottom left-hand corner. I want to shoot this river around it, completely flip it 180. And here I'm going to have it going out the bottom right-hand corner. And this might create a bit more of an interesting zigzag shape through the composition. Again, by going digital, we get to do this and we get to do it immediately and warp and shift and move all sorts of things to create a better dynamic in the end. And again, this is what I love about this medium. The options are endless. So here I selected the river as its own shape and then warped and moved it into a position that I was happy with, and then go back and draw in a new layer over the top of this and start to melt one thing into another. Now, once I'm happy with the position, and I am here, I'm going to go ahead and start to add a bit more color, get some indication of light coming down into that water. Again, this is a matter of working in really general terms and working my way towards specifics, or starting loose and then working towards detail. It's just the same as if I was painting. Now, in terms of the shapes and sizes of the brush, that can vary a lot. Photoshop itself has got a lot of brush tools that come with it, but I've actually really enjoyed using these brushes called Groot brushes, which you can find online. And this is just a simple download to get some of those if you want to have a go painting digitally like what I'm doing here. But one of my favorite things, doesn't matter what kind of brush I'm using, one of my favorite things to control is the opacity of the mark, which makes creating atmospheric effects like clouds over mountains really easy to do by just adjusting that opacity down to say 50% or even 25%, and then I can start layering one mark over another, creating that misty effect. With those shortcut keys on the side of the tablet, I'm also able to quickly change the size of the point that I'm working with, and I'm able to get some more detailed marks that's reminiscent of this snow hanging up in the mountain. Again, I'm continuously referring to my photographs to just make sure that the scene is in keeping with the same geological processes, again, so this picture makes sense. Now, there are some brush packages that are available online that are actually quite reminiscent of traditional media like charcoal and oil paint and pencil, for instance. And this can really give our digital drawing a very painterly effect. As I layer one mark over another, this means that I can get all kinds of really cool textures that are reminiscent of that rock in the distant mountain without having to painstakingly go in and alternate my colors and tones. One of these here is called like a gypsum something rather, but that is really, really handy for just creating that chattered effect across the surface. Again, notice how I'm changing the color ever so slightly in that background from that bluey tinge to this more neutral gray color as it starts to come forward. The blueness is starting to come back out of that color, and tonally I'm stepping it down so it gets a bit darker. Again, darker and more saturated things come closer towards the viewer. So again, I'm still thinking about the same things that I would be as if I was standing at the easel. I just love that bright pop of electric blue that shows through in a glacier. And I know when it comes time to paint this thing, that I'm going to have that as a feature in the painting. Now, it doesn't matter what I'm drawing or painting, the light is super important. That's probably the key consideration for any of my 2D work. I want to make sure that the light is coming from the same direction. So I'm paying attention to that dynamic and what's happening up in the sky and in that distant mountain so that it matches what's happening here in the foreground. And now, speaking of the foreground, it's time to get some detail into these trees. Now, this picture is a pretty decent size when we blow it up to 100% digitally, which allows me again to get some really nice details in here. But I'm not going to go so far as to detail every single leaf on every tree. I just want to give myself an indication. Again, something that's reminiscent of actual brushwork in an oil painting. This is all another layer over the top of that background distant mountain. So here, once I'm happy with the general shapes and forms, I'll start adding things like branches and twigs and clumps of leaves. And I might reserve some of those really fine details for the immediate foreground. But again, within the trees themselves, I'm starting to reserve the saturated, the most intense colors right for the most foreground trees. Again, creating more depth and contrast and opening up this scene a little bit. Again, I still want it to have a bit of three-dimensionality. Now let me take a quick minute to tell you about this video's sponsor, Skillshare. Skillshare is an online learning community with thousands of classes covering dozens of topics in creative and entrepreneurial skills. Premium membership gives you unlimited access so you can join the communities and the classes that are just right for you. Whether you want to fuel your curiosity, your creativity, or even your career, Skillshare is the perfect place to keep you learning and thriving. Now, Skillshare has been really important to me when it comes to learning how to draw digitally. I took one class by Gabriel Bricky, and this was brilliant. It took me from a novice level to reasonably proficient within a very short period of time. I was able to navigate the program a lot better, and I went from drawing very basic things to the complicated designs that you saw here in this video. Now, Skillshare is also super affordable, especially when you compare it to in-person classes and workshops. An annual subscription with Skillshare costs you less than $10 a month. Now, because Skillshare is sponsoring this video, you can get yourself a free 2-month trial by clicking that link in the description down below. Now, just a quick note on the sponsors that I work with these videos that I put out on YouTube. I will only work with sponsors who have a product that I actually use. It's got to help me in my creative journey. I would hate to lead you astray, so I'm only going to work with sponsors that have a good quality product and it's something that I believe in. And I thank you very much for checking it out, and a big thank you to Skillshare for sponsoring this video. Now let's bring some of these details into the immediate foreground and start working with the boulders here. And I just love the mosses and the lichens and the ferns that give these rocks so much character. So once I'm happy with the shape and the form of these boulders, I then start to embellish them with that growth. Again, I'm referring to my reference material to get some indication about how the rocks fragment and break and what kinds of shadows that I'm seeing to make sure this shows up in the digital painting itself. At this point of the process, I really start to drill down and focus on individual key areas that are going to give my picture some real dimension. Now, whilst digital drawing and painting can be a work of art in its own right, to me this is still just a means to an end for my own particular process. This is a detailed plan for an oil painting. But you've noticed here throughout this process, it's still me drawing it. We haven't imported any photography here. We're not manipulating anything that already existed. We've created this from scratch. I say we, but it was totally all me. Anyway, a drawing of this sort of scale would take me anywhere from about 10 to 20 hours to draw digitally. So that's probably a couple of days of work in the studio. But again, for the amount of benefit that this process gives, it actually saves a heck of a lot of time in the design process, because when I consider all of the sketchbook time and then the individual oil painting studies, not to mention going out and painting on plein air, which is still very important, that time adds up. So this is a real time saver for me. But I won't do this for every single painting. I'll just reserve it for those ones that I know are the paintings that I really want to make up and push to another level. That's not something that I've actually seen, just something that I thought would look really cool. So I really love this digital process, and I hope you've enjoyed watching how I go about making a drawing. And perhaps in the future I'll make a much more detailed version of this to actually show you all of the individual processes. But it will take some learning of the program to make sure I'm really proficient before that happens. So now here is the finished article. This is the thing that I'm going to transfer to the canvas and make a painting from. And I couldn't be happier with the end result. Again, perhaps I could have done this with more traditional media, but I just feel that the digital process has allowed me to free up a little bit and create something unique. Now, I really hope that you've enjoyed this video and maybe it's inspired you to give digital drawing a go, or maybe you've learned a couple of new techniques to apply to your existing digital drawing practice. Now, of course, if you liked this video, then please hit that like button for me. And if you want to come back for more and see more episodes of Sketch Endeavor, my Creative Endeavor podcast, or some of my oil painting tutorials, then please make sure you're subscribed to this channel. As always, you can find me on Instagram and Facebook. Those links are down in the description as well. But most important, make sure you're subscribed through my website at andrewtischler.com. Thank you so much for stopping by. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you again soon.